Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
How are you, learners? Welcome to our today's geography lesson. The topic is statistical methods, and the subtopic we are studying the methods of collecting data. When we began this subtopic, learners, we listed 7 methods that can be used by researchers to collect data. Number 1, use of questionnaires. Number 2, interviews. Number 3, observation. Number 4, sampling. Number 5, taking measurements. Number 6, experimentation. Number 7, extracting data from secondary sources. So far, we have studied the first method, which is questionnaires. Today, we are proceeding on to learn about interviews. Learners' interviews is another method that researchers can use to gather data. So, welcome to our today's lesson. The subtopic is interviews. Interviews. What is an interview? Learners, an interview is a direct discussion between a researcher and the respondent. I want you to write down that definition, that an interview, I've said, is a direct discussion, between a researcher and the respondent. Between a researcher and a respondent. Learners, it may be direct when the two meet. The researcher, the one who is collecting data, and the respondent, the one who gives the data. I've said it may be direct when the two meet face to face, when they meet physically, face to face. Or the interview may be indirect. That is when they converse over the telephone. So an interview may be direct, and that happens when the respondent and the researcher meet face to face, or it may be indirect where the researcher discusses with the respondent over the phone or over the telephone. Is that clear, learners? An interview is a direct discussion between a researcher and a respondent. The discussion may be direct where they meet face to face, or they can discuss over the telephone. Now, learners, interviews may be conducted on the basis of a questionnaire, or it may as well be informal. That is where questions are not prepared in advance. When conducting an interview, the researcher may come up with a questionnaire so that he is guided by a questionnaire which is prepared in advance, Alternatively, the researcher may choose to have an informal interview. That is where questions are not prepared in advance. So given that learners, an interview is a discussion between a researcher and a respondent, then another point to note is that this researcher should create a warm and friendly atmosphere so that the respondent or the interviewee can express himself or herself freely. Is the work of the researcher to ensure that he or she makes the respondent to be free. And that happens when the researcher creates a conducive, a friendly environment, an atmosphere where the respondent can freely give information. Because remember, the researcher is collecting data from interviewees, from respondents, from other people. Okay, so if you want information from other people, then it's important that you create an environment, an atmosphere where these people are able to give you the information that you require. And the researcher, throughout the interview, throughout the course of discussing learners, the interviewer or the researcher should encourage the respondent to talk. The researcher should not do much of the talking. Okay, if you want information from people, from these respondents, then you allow them to talk more. Don't talk more than the respondent, because the respondent could be the one that has information that you require. So throughout the interview, if you are a researcher, then ensure that you encourage the respondent to do what? To talk freely. And that you can do by way of gestures, learners. And avoiding unnecessary interruptions. When the respondent is talking as a researcher, then you need to pay attention. Avoid interrupting the interviewer when the interviewee, when the interview is giving information. All right, learners. And another important point is that the interviewer, the one who is seeking or looking for information, the researcher, should also reassure the respondent that the information supplied would be confidential. One reason why respondents may not freely give information is if they are not sure that you will keep the information they provide in confidence. Okay? It has to be confidential. Assure the respondent that any information they give will be kept in confidence, will be confidential. All right? So when that happens, when the respondent is assured of the fact that the information provided will be treated confidentially, then that respondent will be free to give information. So I've just given a few points in regard to interviewing. All right, when you are interviewing, when you are gathering information, when you are collecting information, one method is through interviews. You can conduct interviews. You can conduct interviews. You can arrange for discussion with the respondents. Respondents are persons who have the information that you need as a researcher. So you can organize for a meeting, a discussion, and that we said can be direct. You can arrange to meet the respondents directly, face to face, or you can call them and get the information over the phone. So that is very important. Learners, I will now move to discuss the advantages of interviews. Advantages of interviews. What are some of the advantages of using interviews as a method of collecting data? Number one is that the researcher is able to seek clarification for ambiguous responses. The researcher is able to seek clarification for ambiguous responses, where the respondent gives responses that are not clear, responses that are not unambiguous, then the researcher can seek clarification. Because remember, we've said an interview can be done through face-to-face, or it can be done over the telephone. So where the researcher is not able to get clear responses, then he can seek clarification from the respondent. That's an advantage as compared to, say, a questionnaire that is mailed to a respondent. When you mail a questionnaire to a respondent and the respondent fills the questionnaires and sends them back to you, the researcher may not be able to seek clarification the way he would do or she would do if he's carrying out interviews. So that's an advantage. The researcher is able to seek clarification for ambiguous responses. Number two, the second advantage is that the researcher is in a position to dispel any fears from the respondent. The researcher is in a position to dispel any fears. The researcher is in a position to dispel any fears. The researcher is in a position to dispel any fears from the respondent and therefore ensure that truthful answers are given. Okay? The researcher is in a position to dispel any fears and therefore ensure that truthful answers are given. Because remember, you are talking to a person face to face, so you can dispel any fears. You can read fears from a respondent when you are talking to him or her face to face. You can read the body language of the respondent, and you can tell if an individual is not comfortable, if an individual has fears. It may be fear of not maintaining confidentiality. It may be the fear that the respondent may think that the information that is being provided will not be held in confidence. So when the researcher reads that the respondent is not comfortable giving certain information, since he's talking to this respondent on face-to-face, then the researcher will be in a position to dispel the fears. Is that clear, learners? Let's move on to answer, to give the third, number 3. The third advantage is that direct contact with the respondent enables the researcher to estimate the accuracy of the responses. Direct contact with the respondent enables the researcher to estimate the accuracy of the responses. That's an advantage of interviews. Direct contact. You are directly talking to the respondent. That direct contact between the interviewer and the interviewee. That's what enables the interviewer to estimate the accuracy of the interviewee. All right? Direct contact. Direct contact with the respondent. Direct contact with the respondent enables the researcher. Enables the researcher. The researcher. The researcher is the interviewer. Enables the researcher to do what? To estimate. The, let me move this side, to estimate the accuracy. I said, did I say accuracy? No, I said truthfulness. The truthfulness of the responses. Learners, I know you are old enough sometimes to know when someone is not telling the truth by reading their body language. That's an advantage of carrying out interviews, as opposed to a questionnaire, when an individual sometimes fills the questionnaire in the absence of the researcher. So direct contact has advantages. The researcher will be able to tell sometimes, to some extent, as to the truthfulness of the responses that are given. All right? So, because in communication, learners, we sometimes don't just look at or listen to the words. Other than the words, you can read the truthfulness of the words by looking at the body of the one speaking. Okay? The body speaks. We call it body language. The body communicates. So by directly engaging the respondent, the researcher can sometimes tell the truthfulness. Direct contact. Direct contact. This is contact. Direct contact with the respondent enables the researcher to estimate the truthfulness of the responses. That is point number 3. Moving on to point number 4. We are discussing the advantages of interviews. Number 4, learners, we can say they are, or they can be used to extract information from illiterate people. Interviews can be used to extract information from illiterate people. Interviews can be used to extract information from illiterate people. There are times when the researcher may require information from people who do not know how to read. Okay, so when dealing or seeking information from those who are illiterate, then interviews may be the appropriate method to use. You don't insist on questionnaires, because if you insist on questionnaires, then the responses that you get may not be accurate. But if you are to interview the illiterate, then chances are you may get the appropriate or the right information. And in our discussion of questionnaires, we saw that under questionnaires, learners, we learned that the method of collecting data by using questionnaires may not be appropriate when dealing with people who are illiterate. So to mitigate against that, learners, then when collecting data, you can resort to use of interviews as a method of extracting data from illiterate people. That is the fourth advantage. Then the fifth advantage is that they provide an instant source of information. Interviews provide an instant source of information. They provide an instant source of information. When carrying out interviews, the researcher will instantly get information from the respondents, as opposed to other methods like questionnaires, where the questionnaires have to be mailed, they have to be sent, then the respondents may take time to fill the questionnaires, then they are sent back to the researcher. That learners may take time. But if you are to conduct, say, face-to-face interview or indirect interview through telephone, then the researcher will get direct information instantly. This information is provided instantly. So learners, these are 5 advantages of using interviews to collect data. And on that note, we'll come to the end of our today's lesson. What have we learned today? Today we have defined interviews. We've highlighted we have highlighted 5 advantages of using interviews to collect data. Now, before we close the lesson, I'm going to give you a revision questions. Question number 1, define the term interviews. Number 2, highlight 5 advantages of using interviews to collect data. When answering these 2 questions, please make sure that your exercise book is closed. You also close the video. Try and answer the question from your memory. Go back to the notes after you have attempted to answer the questions on your own. Thank you for attending our today's lesson. In our next lesson, we are going to highlight the disadvantages of using interviews to collect data. For now, I'll say bye-bye.